Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we will talk about the Azadi March in Pakistan, where thousands are marching to demand the resignation of Prime Minister Imran Khan. We will also talk about the largest lesson in astrophysics that took place in Kolkata. But first, we talk about the Rcep trade deal. On Monday, India decided to hold off on signing the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or Rcep, until significant outstanding issues were resolved. This is even when the other 15 countries that are involved in the negotiation of the trade deal said that they were going to sign it in 2020. In this segment, Udit Misra, who writes on economy for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about Rcep, why India has backed out of it, and how this decision will impact it.
Rcep is basically a group of 16 countries, 10 from ASEAN and 6 other countries with whom ASEAN has free trade agreements, like China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and India. And they're coming together to make a regional trade pact. And between these 16 countries, they account for roughly half the population of the world, roughly 1/3 of the world GDP, and a significant amount of trade. The whole idea behind an RCEP is following from the sort of deadlock that we have seen at the global level, in WTO in particular, for the last 2 decades broadly. So RCEP follows from the notion that since we are not getting a swift move on at the global level of trade, and because not everybody agrees to every rule, let's find regional pacts, make bilateral trade agreements, regional trade agreements, because the underpinning of all of this is that trade enhances well-being. Trade enhances the economic status of different constituents. So that's broadly the idea behind RCEP.
So if the idea is to create an integrated market across these 16 countries, why has India backed out of it?
So in any trade pact, whether it be bilateral or multilateral, regional, every country has to decide whether the offer on the table, the rules of the game, as it were, are they acceptable to them or not? Now, trade by the very essence, and I've just done a piece on explaining what trade deficits are and explaining how trade works. The essence of any such arrangement is that you look at what you can do more efficiently. So trade essentially pushes every country to do what they can do better and then give away, stop spending resources on things which you cannot do as efficiently, or you may not have them. And so you import those things because they're cheaper or you didn't have them to begin with. And that's how you enhance. So you have to look at the whole bouquet of goods and say, okay, how many goods, what are the tariffs, what are the other breaks I'm getting against this country, that country, or all the countries involved, and whether I'll be better off. It's a judgment then. India has backed out because India has said that they are concerned about import surges from many of these countries, in particular China. And India has backed it by saying that we already have trade deficits with many of these countries, and biggest of those trade deficits with China. And we do not want to risk a scenario where Chinese goods and other goods sort of get flooded in our country. And what happens to our domestic manufacturers? So steel from China, milk from New Zealand. That's the concern. See, the point here is this. When you run deficits, you may run deficits within free trade agreements. You may run deficits anyway. Suppose you do not have enough milk, you will in any case have to import. If you do not have enough steel, you will in any case have to import. Or if your domestic steel is costlier, you may still want to import because the foreign steel is cheaper. The question to understand here is that is the nature of trade. You don't always look at trade, which is predominantly the way most of the narrative has gone, only from the perspective of producers. You have to look from the perspective of consumers. They are the beneficiaries. We are all, when we say a large market, half the population, only a very small proportion of that are the producers. The producers, if they are not good enough in something, then they better shift to something else. If we can make cycles better, then the market opportunity is great. We can make better cycles for the whole region. And if we are not terribly good at making steel, then, well, it's better to take steel from outside. Your and my car prices will come down. We will be able to consume more. Milk will be available to more kids in an undernourished country like India, right? And it will still create jobs because the delivery of all of those things will require employment. So my view in this is that all trade is at one level disruptive. Obviously, it changes the status quo. It pushes countries to choose and determine. So those who were involved in making steel or into the milk supply chain, if they realize that this is not working, they'll shift and they'll carve out different niches or be part of the larger supply chain. But if you do not play, then there is a very good chance that barring India, the other 15 countries will make a bloc, which they will if India doesn't even in February join. And you have to understand that with WTO sort of stagnating, there are these poles getting created increasingly. Within East Asia, which is like the third pole after, say, Europe and North America for trade, within East Asia itself, I was just reading, I think there are some 83 regional trade agreements within East Asia itself. And between 2000 and 2017, the total regional trade agreements in the world have gone up from some 79 to 287. So the point is that trade works when you know exactly what you're looking for, what you're willing to trade. It's about knowing where your competence is. And you will not run a deficit or a surplus with everybody on everything. It will never happen that way. You will always have some give and take in this. That is what makes the whole thing better.
Okay, so you're saying that, let's say just two countries are trading, consumers will make decisions based on what's the best good, what's cheapest. So if we do end up, let's say, participating in Rcep, consumers stand to benefit. What we need to do is then look at how our producers in our country can make goods that the other country wants and look if we can get free market access there.
Precisely. So you need to know, as a country, you don't obviously bumble along and say that, okay, we are ready to be slaughtered. You need to have a game plan. The fact that India has pulled out reflects very poorly, not just on the fact that India is obviously weak. This is no moment of strength for India. This is a very obvious moment of realization that India was weak. We cannot even play in this backyard. 5 years or 10 years down the line, imagine who are you going to sell your products to? Not North America, not Europe, where standards are even higher. So if you're not even going to sell it to this third pole, which was the closest to you, right, with far greater similarities in tastes and demand and supply, it will become increasingly difficult for India to make those adjustments.
The Congress has been critical about this deal. How much does that have to do with India pulling out?
Well, I don't know how much should be ascribed to that because, Congress itself started with these negotiations. Now it is saying that it's a bad thing for this government to do it, which seems like a very opportunistic ploy just to push the government in a corner. And I wonder what Congress would now do. They haven't, I don't think, complimented necessarily the Prime Minister for having done what they wanted. But the point is not so much the political sort of wrangling within the country, because politicians may not necessarily be best equipped to make this technical decision about trade. What is sad is that with every passing generation, with every passing year, we will find more and more people who could have had an opportunity to be part of some global supply chain or regional supply chain and got a job. That opportunity has foreclosed by India pulling out. And that is a sad aspect, regardless of which party remains in power and what happens.
With the government taking a stand and saying that, hey, if we would have got on board with Rcep, it would have hurt these said producers. Do you think it's just like a way to gain a political point?
So yes, definitely. It seems like certain lobbies within the production have got their way by pushing the government and saying that, this will destroy our business. But that's a sad reflection again on how we've gone about doing this. Instead of, as you sort of very correctly identified, instead of our noticing what is it that we want to sell in Korea and what is it that we want to sell in Japan, and can we have a very targeted approach? Has the government worked with the industry here? Has the industry actually shown initiative? I'm not too sure, because all our past data on the existing deals with Korea, Japan, Malaysia, all have shown rather stagnant data on there's hardly been any process. It shows also some lack of enterprise on the industry part also. It's not just the government to blame, but government is setting the rules here. By pulling out, I feel that it's basically said we will not play. If you do not play, you are not going to score.
Next, we talk about Pakistan. Right now, thousands of people in Pakistan are taking part in what is being called the Azadi March to demand the resignation of Prime Minister Imran Khan. The march began on October 27th in Karachi and passed through Sindh and Punjab, eventually reaching Islamabad. Such long marches have actually become a prominent feature of Pakistan politics. In this segment, Nirupama Subramanian, the national editor at Indian Express, joins us to talk about who is leading the march this time, what are the reasons behind it, and the significance such marches have in Pakistan politics.
Yeah, so these long marches have become a permanent feature of Pakistan politics since 2007, I would say, when the Chief Justice of that time was deposed by the military dictator, then General Musharraf. And then it became a huge event. Every time the deposed Chief Justice went from one city to another, he would take out a long march. And that long march would last 24 hours sometime as he went from city to city, or even a few hours at a time. But it became an occasion for all the opposition to Musharraf to rally around that long march. And these long marches were always seen as having the backing of the army and the security establishment, because Pakistan is such a place that a long march in any other democratic country would not attract that much attention. For instance, in India, you have had a farmers' march in Maharashtra. Governments didn't feel threatened by it. Nobody thought they were going to be toppled. But in Pakistan's politics, it's taken on this new meaning. In every previous Long March episode before 2014, as I said, in 2009 and in 2010, the army has always stepped in to, sort of clear the air and say something or the other about the political situation, make a pronouncement about the political situation during the Long March. And it has always seemed as if the army has taken the side of the protesters.
It is important to note that back in 2014, when Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was in power, Imran Khan himself came out with a long march in an attempt to topple his government. And the role of the army was clear there as well.
In fact, Imran Khan openly asked the army chief to pronounce on the matter, to actually unseat. In a way, he was asking the army chief to topple the government. And he called the army the third umpire. He used a cricketing term, and he said, "I'm appealing to the third umpire." And, that march lasted for about 4 months. And it ended in complete disaster. But Nawaz Sharif emerged from that very shaken, because he knew then that the army had it in for him. So you had this as a regular feature in the last 10 years, from the time that Musharraf quit office and democratically elected governments have been in power.
This time the march is being led by someone unsuspected, she says. His name is Maulana Fazlur Rahman. He's the leader of the Jamiat-e-Ulema Islami, an Islamist political party. Fazlur, she says, has had a checkered past.
He was on the side of Benazir Bhutto when Zia was in power. He took part in the movement for the restoration of democracy. And his base is basically Pashtuns from the Northwest Frontier region. And he's had constant contacts with the Taliban. The madrasas in the Northwest Frontier province were feeding the Taliban movement. He actually led a lot of protests at the time the US started bombing Afghanistan after September 2001. They started bombing from October 2001. And he led huge protests in Pakistan. Also, to protest Pakistan's role in helping the US, he protested that as well. And then he joined hands with other Islamic parties in Pakistan to help Musharraf ratify his coup, his 1999 coup. So basically what's bothering him is this, that he has been completely marginalized in the politics of Pakistan, in the politics of the Northwest Frontier region. In fact, for the first time He lost the election, his own election to the National Assembly this time, although he had contested from two places. So he's a little worried about his own future. And I think this was one way of him signaling to the army that, guys, look, I'm still around. I am very much here. These are my supporters. And you better take notice of me.
She says that Fazlur believes that Imran Khan was selected by the army. When the results were announced, he tried to get other political parties to boycott the results, but nobody joined him. And now he wants Imran Khan to resign.
And of course, he says that Imran Khan's been a disaster for the economy. He calls him the Gorbachev of Pakistan, which is, I think, an allusion to how Gorbachev is now seen as being the cause of the breakup of the Soviet Union. So he seems to be signaling to the army that he's still relevant in the politics and that they should not ignore him. So in that sense, I wouldn't characterize this as a march for democracy or restoration of democracy. I don't think it's like that. I think most political parties in Pakistan have now come to terms with the reality that the army is going to play a role in politics, that this is going to be a hybrid system like it is in Myanmar. For instance, in Myanmar, of course, the army even sits in parliament. Here they don't. But in the last elections, they played a big role in helping Imran Khan win the election. And I think many players now are coming to terms with that. So in that sense, Maulana Fazlur Rahman is probably signaling. That's one way of looking at it.
There are many who think that the army must have some role to play in the march. Because previously, when the army has wanted, they have stopped people. But that hasn't happened this time. And there are many theories about this. One relates to the fact that Fazlur had been insistent that the march takes place during this period, when Army Chief General Bajwa's extension is to be decided.
So some people have tended to see this as perhaps a pressure tactic by General Bajwa on Imran Khan to get that 3-year extension. That's one way of looking at it. Another theory that is doing the rounds is that the army is sending out a signal to the US, which is trying to do a deal in Afghanistan with the help of Pakistan, that, guys, don't put so much pressure on us. Our internal situation is not great. We are having many domestic problems. We have the economic problem. And look, now there is this Maulana Fazlur Rahman. He is rising up against Imran Khan. So we have a lot to deal with. There's a lot on our plate. That is another theory. And of course, they've had a few Afghanistan flags come up during this march. And there have been rumors that Afghan Taliban are in this march. There's that theory as well. And then the other theory, which, I mean, there's no way of confirming any of these theories. I'm just putting it out there. The other theory is that this is actually an internal war in the establishment between those who backed Imran Khan, thinking that he would be a long-distance runner, only to find that he lost his grip on the economy. He didn't do as well as expected. And now there is some division within the army between those who backed Imran Khan and those who think that it's time to ditch him. So where does this leave Fazlur Rahman and the opposition and Imran Khan? I think Imran Khan has not expected to resign just because Fazlur Rahman tells him to resign. Fazlur Rahman is not that kind of opposition. He has managed to muster a lot of people, and these are people basically students and clerics from madrasas. You won't see a single woman in that march, also because he has said no women are allowed. And that's because, being an Islamic party, it follows the Sharia, and, they even prevented women from actually women journalists from covering the march. So the crowd here is unlike what Imran Khan had in his long march, which was by chic women from middle-class families. They came in their SUVs, they brought their babies. So it was all an atmosphere of picnic, and it was a very different kind of thing. Here you have these men aged from 16 upward, or maybe younger. So it's a different thing. And these parties typically, for instance, in the National Assembly, in a coalition with several similar parties, the jui-f and the other parties managed to get only 14 assembly seats. So this is the extent of their vote-catching ability. So Imran Khan is not going to resign because they ask him to. But he would be rattled if he really senses that the army is behind it. So far, army and Imran Khan have been saying that they are on the same page, That's why it's a little odd that this march has been allowed to come this far. But what it does, basically, the non-religious parties like the PPP and the PMLN, they used to have the street power to take out marches like this, but they have been reluctant to come on board this march. They have kept away. And one or two leaders from these parties, for instance, Shehbaz Sharif, he has come and addressed the gathering. So has Bilawal Bhutto of the Pakistan People's Party. But other than that, there's little support from the other parties. So you can see perhaps he has filled that opposition vacuum. And he is now regarded as the main guy because he's speaking out against Imran Khan. He's got a lot of traction from a lot of anti-Imran Khan constituencies across the country for just this.
But despite all this traction, Nirupama says that the march is going nowhere. And Fazlur may now need a face saver to call the march off. And last, we talk about astronomy. Yesterday in Kolkata, a group of 1,598 students attended the largest lesson in astrophysics to make it to the Guinness Book of World Records. The attempt was part of the 5th edition of the India International Science Exhibition that began on November 5th. The 45-minute lecture was delivered by Sameer Dhur, the astronomer and science outreach in charge at the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics. The students from class 6 to class 11 came from numerous districts of West Bengal and made small models of advanced spectroscopes using cardboard after the lecture. Spectroscopes are instruments used by astronomers to record the temperature and understand the chemical composition along with other aspects of celestial bodies situated millions of light years away from Earth. The attempt by the student community was marked as a salute to efforts of scientists like Meghnad Saha and C.V. Raman, both of whom made significant contribution to sciences in India, mainly during their stay in Kolkata. You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.